Enigma of the Sages. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. Once upon a time, when I had been for many years of my life sailing from the Arctic to the Antarctic pole, I was cast ashore by the will of God on the coast of a certain great ocean. And though I was well acquainted with the properties of that sea, I did not know whether there was generated near those shores that little fish, Edenius, which is so anxiously sought, even unto this present, by men of high and low degree. But as I watched the naiads and nymphs disporting themselves in the water, being fatigued with my previous toils, and overwhelmed by the multitude of my thoughts, I was lulled asleep by the soft murmur of the waves, and as I slept sweetly and gently, I beheld a marvelous vision. I saw ancient Neptune, with a trident in his hand, rise with venerable aspect from our sea, who after a friendly salutation carried me to a most beautiful island. This island was situated in the southern hemisphere and contained all that is required for man's use and delight. It appeared a more pleasant and delightful abode than Virgil's Elysian fields. The shores thereof were fringed with verdant myrtles and cypresses. The meadows were studded with a large variety of beautiful and fragrant flowers. The slopes of the hills were clad with vines, olives, and cedars. The roads were overhung by their intertwining branches of laurels and pomegranate trees, which afforded grateful shade to the wayfarer. The plains were covered with groves of orange and lemon trees. In short, the island was an epitome of earthly beauty. Concealed under a rock, Neptune showed me two minerals of that island, gold and steel. Then I was conducted to an orchard in the middle of a meadow, which was at no great distance, the same being planted with a great variety of beautiful trees. Among these he showed me 7 enriched by particular names, and 2 of them towered above the rest. One bore fruit which shone like the sun, and its leaves resembled gold. The fruit of the other was whiter than lilies, and its leaves were like fine silver. Neptune called the first the solar, and the second the lunar tree. The only thing which it was difficult to obtain in the island was water. The inhabitants had tried to get it from a spring by means of a conduit, and to elicit it from many things. But the result was a poisonous water, and the only water that could be drunk was that condensed out of the rays of the sun and moon. The worst of it was that no one could attract more than 10 parts of this water. It was wonderful water, I can tell you, for I saw it with my eyes and touched with my hands its dazzling whiteness, which surpassed all the splendor of the snow. While I stood wrapped in admiration, Neptune vanished from my sight, and there stood before me a tall man, on whose forehead the name of Saturn was inscribed. He took a vessel and scooped up 10 parts of the water, in which he placed fruit from the solar tree, and the fruit was consumed like ice in warm water. So I said unto him, Lord, I behold here a marvelous thing. The water is small in quantity, nevertheless the fruit of this tree is consumed therein by a gentle heat. To what purpose is all this? He graciously replied, My son, it is true that this thing is powerful, but this water is the water of life, and has such power to exalt the qualities of this fruit. Then it shall, afterwards, without sowing or planting, only by its fragrance, transmute the 6 trees which remain into its own nature. Moreover, this water is as a woman to the fruit. The fruits of this tree can putrefy nowhere but in this water. And though the fruit by itself be wonderful and precious, yet when it putrefies in this water, it brings forth out of this putrefaction a salamander that endures the fire. Its blood is more precious than all treasures, and has power to render fertile 6 trees such as you see here, and to make their fruit sweeter than honey. Then I said unto him, Lord, how is this thing done? He replied, I have already told thee that the fruits of the solar tree are living, and they are sweet. But whereas the fruit while it is cooked in this water can inform but 1 part, after its coction has been completed it can inform 1,000. I then inquired whether the fruit was boiled in this water over a fierce fire, and how long. He answered, This water has an inward fire, and when this is assisted by continuous outward warmth, it burns up 3 parts of its own body, with this body of the fruit, until nothing but an incredibly small part remains, which, however, possesses the most marvelous virtue. This is cooked by the wise master first for 7 months, and then for 10. But in the meantime, on each 50th day, a variety of phenomena is witnessed. Again, I besought him whether this fruit was cooked in several waters, and whether anything was added to it. He made answer, "There is no water, either in this island or in the whole country, but only this kind alone that can properly penetrate the pores of this fruit. And you should know the solar tree also grew out of this water, which is collected by magnetic attraction out of the rays of the sun and moon. Hence the fruit and the water exhibit a wonderful sympathy and correspondence. If any foreign substance were added to the water, its virtue would only be impaired. Hence nothing should be put into the water but this fruit. After its decoction, the fruit has life and blood, and its blood causes all barren trees to bring forth the same precious fruit." I asked whether the water was obtained by any secret process, or whether it was to be obtained everywhere. He said, "It is found everywhere, and no one can live without it, but it is best when extracted by means of our steel, which is found in the belly of the ram. If you ask what is its use, I answer that before the due amount of coction has been performed, it is deadly poison, but afterwards it is the great medicine, and yields 29 grains of blood, each one of which produces 864 of the fruits of the solar tree." I asked whether it could be still further improved. "The sages say," he returned, "that it can be increased first to 10, then to 100, then to 1,000, then to 10,000 times its own quantity, and so on." I asked whether that water was known by any particular name. He cried aloud, saying, "Few know it, but all have seen it, and see and love it. It has many names, but we call it the water of our sea, the water that does not wet the hands." "Do they use it for any other purpose?" I inquired. "And is anything born in it?" "Every created thing," he replied, "uses it, but invisibly. All things owe their birth to it and live in it. Nothing is, properly speaking, in it. Through itself mingles with all things. It can be improved by nothing but the fruit of the solar tree, without which it is of no use in this work." I was going to ask him to speak more plainly when he began to cry out in such a loud voice that I awoke out of my sleep, and Saturn and the hope of getting my questions answered vanished altogether. Be contented, nevertheless, with what I have told you, and be sure that it is impossible to speak more clearly. If you do not understand what I have said, you will never grasp the writings of other philosophers. After a while, I fell into another deep sleep, in which I saw Neptune standing over me, congratulating me on our happy meeting in the garden of the Hesperides. He held up to me a mirror, in which I saw the whole of nature unveiled. After we had exchanged a few remarks, I thanked him for conducting me to this beautiful garden and introducing me to the company of Saturn, and I heartily besought him to resolve for me the difficulties and doubts which Saturn had left uncleared. "For instance," I said, "I have read and believe that for every act of generation, a male and a female are required, and yet Saturn spoke of generation by placing the solar fruit in the water, or mercury of the sages. What did he mean? As the Lord of the Sea, I know that you are acquainted with these things, and I entreat of you to answer me." He said, "What you say about the act of generation is true, and yet you know that worms are produced in a different way from quadrupeds, namely by putrefaction, and the place or earth in which this putrefaction occurs is feminine. In our substance, the mother is the water of which so much has been said, and its offspring is produced by putrefaction, after the manner of worms. Hence the sages call it the phoenix and salamander. Its generation is a resurrection rather than a birth, and for this reason it is immortal or indestructible. Now, whatsoever is conceived of two bodies is subject to the law of death, but the life of this fruit is a separation from all that is corruptible about it. It is the same with the phoenix, which separates of itself from its corruptible body." I inquired whether the substance was compound in its nature. "No," he said, There is only the solar fruit that is put into the water, which must be to the fruit in the proportion of 10 to 1. Believe that what was here revealed to you in a dream by Saturn, after the manner of our island, is not a dream, but a bright reality which will stand the test of broad daylight." With these words, he abruptly left me, without listening to my further questions, and I awoke and found myself at home in Europe. May God show to you, gentle reader, the full interpretation of my dreams. Farewell. To the triune God be praise and glory.